In the gloom of my own house, shivering from the cold and clutching an old flashlight, I found a loose floorboard in the basement. When I pried it up, I discovered a black folder holding documents that chilled my blood more than the winter night. My own son, Sterling, had forged my signature and was systematically emptying my bank accounts. When he returned the next morning, suggesting that an assisted living facility was what's best for me, I showed him the documents, and the color drained from his face. "Dad," he stammered. "I've already called the police and my lawyer," I calmly replied. Before I continue, I want to ask you to subscribe and let me know in the comments where in the US or the world you're watching this video from. My name is Elijah Vance, and at 78 years old, I never imagined my only son would be capable of this. Here, in this quiet neighborhood of Cypress Creek, where I have lived my whole life, I built with my own hands the house where I raised my family and where I loved my Grace, until God called her home 5 years ago. The cold air this morning reminds me of that night. Even though 3 months have passed since Sterling tried to kick me out of my own home, I still feel a shiver of dread when I remember it. Not from the cold I suffered when he cut the power, but from the coldness of his heart. It all started after Grace passed away. My son began visiting me more often, which initially filled me with joy. "Dad, I worry about you living here all alone," he'd say while pouring me coffee that was always too watery. "At your age, you need someone to look after you." At first, his words sounded like genuine concern, but over time, his visits grew tense. "This house is too much for you," he insisted, looking around the walls as if calculating their value. "There's a beautiful assisted living place close to my home in the city. You could sell me this house and use that money to pay for your stay there." Every time he mentioned the facility, I simply shook my head. "Everything I have is here, son. Every corner speaks to me of your mother." The last time I saw Grace alive was on the back porch, sitting together, watching the sunset. She held my hand and said, "Elijah, promise me you'll take care of our home. It's the sanctuary we built with so much love." I made that promise while tears streamed down her pale cheeks. Sterling didn't understand this, or maybe he did and just cared more about the property's market value than the memories held within these walls. "You're stubborn as a mule, Dad," he told me one day, no longer hiding his frustration. "You can't keep living in the past. Mom's gone." "But I'm still here," I countered. "And as long as I have the strength, I'll continue caring for what your mother and I built." That's when his attitude began to change. His visits were no longer kind. Now he came to complain about everything. The house was dirty. I looked unkempt. The food in the refrigerator was expired. One morning, he arrived with some papers. "It's to transfer the administration of your savings," he explained without looking me in the eye. "You're getting older, Dad. I'll make sure your money is safe and generating good interest." Trusting him, I signed. After all, he was my son, my own flesh and blood. What father wouldn't trust his own child? In the following weeks, I noticed strange things. Bills I didn't remember receiving. Calls from the bank that Sterling intercepted. And then I started having trouble withdrawing money from my account. "It's better if I handle everything," he'd tell me every time I asked. "You just rest, Dad. You've worked enough in this life." Brenda, my neighbor of 30 years, was the first to warn me. "Be careful, Elijah," she told me one afternoon while watering the plants in her front yard. "I saw Sterling here with a man in a suit, measuring your land when you weren't around." I didn't want to believe her. What father wants to think ill of his own son? But she planted a seed of doubt that wouldn't stop growing. Winter arrived early that year. The nights turned bitterly cold, especially for these old bones of mine. One afternoon, Sterling showed up at my door with an expression I couldn't read. "Dad, I've been thinking." He started, sitting in the armchair that had been his mother's favorite. "This house needs a lot of repairs. The roof leaks. The electrical wiring is old. It's dangerous for you." "I've lived here 50 years, son," I replied. "I know every nail, every board. I know how to fix what breaks. You're too old to be climbing on the roof or messing with wires," he insisted. "Besides, the doctor said your knees are getting worse. What will happen when you can't manage the stairs anymore?" "Then I'll live downstairs," I said with a smile. "This house has plenty of space." I watched him clench his jaw, that same look he had as a boy when he didn't get his way. He was always stubborn, just like his mother. Grace would furrow her brow like that when she was angry too. "Dad," his voice was harder now, "I sold my condo in the city. I need the money from this house to buy a new one. I've already found interested buyers." I was frozen. He sold his condo, confident that I would sell him my house? "It's the logical thing to do," he raised his voice. "What does an old man like you need with such a huge house? It's a waste." He had never spoken to me like that before. For a moment, I saw a stranger sitting across from me, not the boy I raised with so much love. "This house is not for sale, Sterling," I told him firmly, "and I would appreciate it if you respected my decision." He jumped up, his face red with rage. "You've always been selfish. You think I don't know you have money put away? That I don't know about the land you sold before Mom died? I deserve that inheritance." "Your inheritance will come when I die, son, not before," I said. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the window panes shook. I didn't see him for 2 weeks. I thought his anger would pass, that he would come to his senses. How wrong I was. He returned on a particularly cold night. The forecast called for below freezing temperatures. He knocked on my door just as it was getting dark. "I came to apologize, Dad," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was rude. "You're right. It's your house and your decision." I invited him in. We shared a dinner he brought himself. We talked about trivial things, as if the argument had never happened. When he left, I felt relieved. Maybe things would return to normal. I was getting ready for bed when the lights flickered and then went out completely. I checked the switch. I flipped it several times with no result. I tried to turn on the bedside lamp, but it didn't work either. A blackout. I looked for my cell phone to call the power company, but the battery was dead. I had forgotten to charge it, one of those distractions that become more frequent with age. The house cooled quickly, without the electric heat. I put on an extra sweater, then remembered the old flashlight I kept in the kitchen drawer. I found it by feel, and was glad to see it still worked, even though its light was weak. I stepped out onto the porch to see if it was a general outage, but the neighbors' houses had lights on. Only mine was dark. That's when I noticed it. The fuse box was open, and someone had cut the main wires. Fear flooded me. A thief! Someone wanted to hurt me. I was about to go to Brenda's house when my cell phone rang. It had miraculously come back to life. Or so I thought, until I saw a small portable charger connected to it that I didn't remember putting there. It was Sterling. "How are you, Dad?" His voice sounded strangely satisfied. "The power went out," I told him, without mentioning the cut wires. Something told me to keep that information to myself. "I know," he replied. "I was the one who cut the electricity. It's for your own good," he continued. "That house is dangerous without proper electricity. Now, You'll understand why you can't keep living there. I'll come get you tomorrow to take you to the assisted living facility. I've already paid for the first month." Before I could respond, he hung up. I stared at the phone in shock. My own son. How could he do this to me? The cold intensified. I thought about going to Brenda's, but it was almost 11 at night, and she took sleeping pills. I didn't want to frighten her. I decided to wait until morning and then seek help. I remembered that I kept extra blankets and warm clothes in the basement. With the weak beam of my flashlight, I carefully descended the steps to the basement. The yellow light danced across the concrete walls, creating ghostly shadows. As I searched for the blankets in an old chest, the flashlight's beam revealed something strange on the floor. One of the wooden boards looked newer than the rest, as if it had been recently replaced. I didn't remember doing any repairs there. Driven by a strange hunch, I knelt down with difficulty and examined the board. Sure enough, it wasn't as worn as the others and looked like it had been tampered with. With my old fingers, I felt for the edge and pulled. The board lifted with surprising ease. Beneath it was a hollow space, and inside that, a black folder. I pulled it out, feeling my heart pounding in my ears. Why was this hidden in my basement? I opened the folder under the flashlight's trembling light, and what I saw took my breath away. They were bank documents, deeds, promissory notes, all with my signature, or what appeared to be my signature. But I had never signed those papers. There were bank statements showing enormous transfers to an account I didn't recognize, loan documents using my house as collateral, an application to have me declared mentally incapacitated, ready to be submitted, only missing a doctor's signature. And worst of all, a purchase agreement for my house, supposedly signed by me, selling the property to Sterling for a fraction of its real value. The closing date was in 3 days. My son wasn't just trying to take my house. He was systematically stealing everything I owned, leaving me with nothing. If these papers were processed, I would end up homeless, penniless, declared incapacitated, and locked away in a facility I couldn't leave. Tears blurred my vision. How could the child I raised, the one I taught about honesty and hard work, turn into this? At what moment did I lose my son without realizing it? I spent the night reviewing every document, every transaction, every forged signature. Rage and sorrow mixed in my chest. By the time the dawn began to filter light through the small basement windows, I already had a plan. I called Brenda from my cell phone, which now had some battery power. I briefly explained the situation. "I always knew that boy was up to something," she said, outraged. "What can we do?" "I need you to call my best friend, Wally," I asked her. Wally had been a police officer, and though retired now, he still had contacts. Tell him to come over with his nephew, the lawyer. And if you can, lend me your phone charger. Brenda arrived 15 minutes later with the charger, some hot food, and her indignation intact. "Do you want me to stay with you?" she offered. "No, my friend. It's better if you're not here when Sterling arrives. I don't want him disrespecting you." After she left, I plugged in my phone and called the bank. I explained the situation, and they temporarily froze my accounts. Then I photographed all the documents as evidence. Wally and his nephew arrived an hour later. They reviewed the documents and confirmed my fears. "This is fraud, Mr. Vance," the young lawyer Marcus said. "Forgery of documents, identity theft, attempted improper appropriation. Your son could face serious charges." "What should I do?" I asked, feeling a knot in my throat. "For now, play along," Wally advised. "When he comes, act normal. We'll be nearby. As soon as he admits anything or tries to take you against your will, we'll intervene." They hid at Brenda's house, where they could watch my door. I waited, sitting in my armchair, with the documents spread on the coffee table. The electricity was still cut, but it no longer mattered. The daylight was enough. At 10 in the morning, I heard the engine of Sterling's car. I took a deep breath, preparing for the most difficult encounter of my life. He walked in without knocking, as if the house were already his. He was carrying a small suitcase. "Morning, Dad," he said with false cheer. "See? I told you this house isn't safe for you anymore. There isn't even any power. I packed some of your things. The assisted living facility is waiting." He looked at me, expecting to find me defeated, shivering with cold, ready to surrender. Instead, he found me serene, sitting with dignity, looking straight into his eyes. "Good morning, Sterling," I replied calmly. "Before we go, there's something you need to see." His eyes followed my gesture to the coffee table. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. Then he recognized the documents, and the color abandoned his face. "What? What's this?" he stammered. "Where did you get those papers?" "Darkness sometimes reveals things that light hides," I said to him, "like a loose board in the basement, like a son willing to destroy his father." He took a step back, as if my words had struck him physically. "Dad, can I explain?" he began, but I interrupted him. "Explain what? How you forged my signature? How you planned to steal everything from me? Or how you were going to lock me in a nursing home by having me declared incompetent?" "I did it for your own good," he yelled, abandoning all pretense. "You're a stubborn old man who doesn't know what's best for himself. That house is worth millions, and you're clinging to it because of some stupid memories." His words hurt me more than any physical blow. This wasn't the boy that Grace and I had raised with so much love. "I've already called the police and my lawyer," I informed him, with sadness. "They're on their way." His face went from shock to fury. For a moment, I thought he would lunge at me or the documents. But then, as if responding to an invisible signal, the door opened and Wally and Marcus walked in, followed by a uniformed police officer. Sterling slumped into a chair, defeated, while the officer read him his rights. I looked out the window at the garden that Grace cared for so carefully. Her roses were still there, enduring the winter. "I promised I'd take care of our home, my love," I murmured, "and I'm going to keep that promise." Before continuing with what happened next, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, have you known anyone who has suffered betrayal from a close relative? How do you think you would react in my situation? Your opinion is very important to me. Thank you for returning to hear my story. As I told you in the previous chapter, I discovered that my son, Sterling, had been plotting to take everything I owned, forging my signature and preparing documents to have me declared incompetent. The police took him away that day, but that was just the beginning of a battle I never imagined facing at 78 years old. That afternoon, after Sterling was taken away, I stayed alone in my house, sitting in the armchair that was my late Grace's favorite. My hands were shaking as I held an old family photograph. In it, Sterling was barely 10 years old, smiling and showing a missing tooth. At what point did that innocent child turn into the man who tried to destroy me? Officer Davies, a young police officer, returned later to take my official statement. "Mr. Vance," he said respectfully, "it's important you understand that pressing charges against your son involves a legal process that can be long and painful." "I know, son," I replied, offering him coffee that I prepared on the stove since the electricity had only just been fixed. "But it has been more painful to discover that my only son planned to steal everything from me and have me locked away." "Your son claims he did it for your own good," the officer commented, tasting the coffee. He says you're no longer fit to care for yourself and that the house is dangerous for you. I let out a bitter laugh. And cutting the electricity on a freezing night was for my own good? Forging my signature to empty my accounts was for my own good? The officer nodded, understanding my point. Mr. Vance, do you have anyone who can stay with you these next few days? Any family or friends? I thought of Brenda, my neighbor, but she had her own health issues. My other friends were as old as I was, or had already passed away. I'll be fine alone, I affirmed with more confidence than I felt. When the officer left, the house seemed bigger and emptier than ever. Wally, my old friend, the ex-cop, had managed to get an electrician to come repair the wires Sterling had cut. By nightfall, I had power again, but the damage was already done. It wasn't just the electricity that was broken. It was the trust, the love, the bond between a father and his son. That night, I could barely sleep. I got up several times to make sure the doors and windows were tightly locked. Even though Sterling was detained, I felt as if the betrayal had left my home vulnerable, exposed. The next morning, Wally's nephew, the young lawyer Marcus, came to see me. He carried a briefcase full of papers and wore a worried expression. Mr. Vance, I've thoroughly reviewed the documents you found, he began, spreading several papers on my kitchen table. The situation is more serious than we thought. He explained that Sterling hadn't just forged my signature on bank documents and the supposed sale of my house. He had also created a shell company in my name. He had applied for loans using my house as collateral and had even started selling lots of a piece of land on the outskirts of the neighborhood that had belonged to my family for generations. That land is my grandfather's legacy, I said, my voice cracking. I kept it all these years to leave it to Sterling someday. The problem is he's already received payments for 2 lots, Marcus explained. The buyers are innocent people who didn't know about the fraud. And what will happen to them? I asked, concerned for those people too. We'll have to reach an agreement, but first, we need to stop any pending transactions. For the next 2 hours, Marcus explained the legal plan to recover what Sterling had tried to steal from me. We would sign documents to freeze all my properties, nullify the powers I had given my son, and file formal complaints for every crime committed. Mr. Vance, Marcus said seriously, I have to ask you something important. Are you willing to take your son to trial? He could face several years in prison. The question hit me like a rock in the chest. Despite everything Sterling had done, he was still my son, the boy I raised with grace, who took his first steps clutching my fingers, who cried in my arms when he scraped his knees for the first time. Is there no other way? I asked. We could seek a settlement, but we would need him to return everything he took and sign documents renouncing any claim to your properties. And even then, the fraud is already documented. The prosecutor's office could proceed even if you withdraw the complaint. I ran my trembling hand over my tired face. I need to think about it, I finally said. Marcus left me alone with my thoughts. I went out to the back patio, where Grace had planted a small rose garden that I continued to care for in her memory. I sat on the wooden bench and closed my eyes, imagining what she would advise me. Grace always had a kind heart, but also a strong sense of justice. Love doesn't mean enabling abuse, she used to tell me when we talked about raising Sterling. Loving also means setting boundaries. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call. It was Sterling's wife, Naomi. We had never been close. She always seemed distant, as if tolerating my presence only out of obligation. Can I visit you, Mr. Vance? She asked, her voice indicating she had been crying. An hour later, Naomi was sitting across from me in the living room, her hands clasped in her lap. She looked drawn, with deep dark circles under her eyes and uncombed hair. "I didn't know any of this," were her first words. "I swear it on my children." My grandchildren, Ethan and Valerie, were 8 and 6 years old. I rarely saw them because Sterling and Naomi lived in the city and seldom visited. "Sterling told me that you had agreed to sell him the house to move to a safer place," she continued, "that the papers were already signed and the money was in your account." Naomi started to cry, covering her face with her hands. "We sold our condo. We invested all our savings in remodeling this house. And now, it turns out it was all a lie." I felt a pang of compassion for her. Apparently, Sterling hadn't just deceived me, but his own family, too. "The children keep asking about their father. I don't know what to tell them. Ethan adores his dad. He sees him as a hero." "Where are they now?" I asked. "With my sister. I didn't want to bring them here until I knew, until I truly understood what happened." I offered her a glass of water and waited for her to calm down. Then I showed her the documents I had found, patiently explaining what each one meant. "I can't believe it," she murmured, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. "Why would he do something like this?" "Money changes people," I replied sadly, "and ambition is a sickness that slowly consumes the soul." We sat in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Naomi looked up. "What are you going to do, Mr. Vance? Will you send Sterling to prison?" The question hung in the air like lead. I thought of my grandchildren growing up without their father, visiting him in prison, carrying the stigma. But I also thought of what would happen if Sterling went unpunished. "I haven't decided yet," I answered honestly. Naomi nodded, understanding the gravity of my dilemma. Before leaving, she surprised me with an awkward hug, the first I'd received from her in all the years she had been married to my son. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "for everything." That night, sitting on the front porch watching the evening fade, I heard a car stop in front of my house. It was a truck I didn't recognize. A man in a suit who looked to be about 50, accompanied by an elegant woman, got out. "Mr. Elijah Vance?" "Well?" the man asked as he approached. "That's right," I replied cautiously. "How can I help you?" "My name is Robert Thompson, and this is my wife, Elaine. We bought a lot of your land on the outskirts of the neighborhood. We were told you wanted to sell to finance your move to an assisted living facility." I felt my blood boil. Another one of Sterling's lies. "We paid a considerable down payment," the man continued. "But today, the bank called us saying there were problems with the transaction. Could you explain what's going on?" I invited them in and told them the truth. I explained that my son had acted without my knowledge or consent, forging documents and selling property he wasn't authorized to sell. The Thompsons listened to my story with growing horror. When I finished, Robert ran a hand through his hair, visibly distraught. "That land was going to be our retirement," he explained. "We planned to build a small home to spend our final years." "Just like I did in this house," I commented with bitter irony. Elaine looked at me with understanding. "It's horrific what your son tried to do to you to betray a father's trust like that." "The worst part is, we're not the only ones," Robert added. "There's another family, the Johnsons, who also bought a lot. They have 3 kids, and we're excited to build their house there." The situation was getting more and more complicated. Now, it wasn't just my suffering, but also that of these innocent families who had been indirect victims of Sterling's ambition. "I promise you, we'll find a solution," I told them as they left. "You won't lose your money." That promise meant I would eventually have to sell at least part of the family land, something I had sworn never to do. But I couldn't allow others to suffer because of my son's actions. The next day, Marcus returned with more news. The prosecutor's office had found additional evidence on Sterling's phone and computer. There were messages with a real estate agent planning the quick sale of my house once I was declared incompetent. They also found transfers to offshore accounts, where he was apparently hiding some of the money he had diverted. "The situation is serious, Mr. Vance," Marcus explained. "The prosecutor says they have enough evidence to proceed even without your testimony. The charges include fraud, forgery, breach of trust, and possibly money laundering." "How much time could he spend in prison?" I asked, a lump forming in my throat. "With all these charges, between 8 and 15 years. The words fell upon me like a heavy slab. 15 years. By the time Sterling got out, I probably wouldn't be in this world anymore. My grandchildren would be adults who would barely remember their father. "Can I speak with him?" I asked. Marcus looked surprised. "Are you sure? He could use anything you say against you. I need to look him in the eye, son. I need to understand." Marcus made some calls and arranged for me to visit Sterling at the detention center the following day. I barely slept that night, thinking about what I would say to my son when I saw him face to face. The next morning dawned gray and cold, as if the weather reflected my state of mind. Brenda offered to accompany me, but I preferred to go alone. There are conversations a father must have privately with his son, no matter how painful they are. The detention center was a gloomy building with high walls and barbed wire. I had never been in a place like it. I had to pass through several security checkpoints before they took me to a small room divided by thick glass. There were metal chairs bolted to the floor and phones for communicating across the glass. I waited nearly 20 minutes until Sterling finally appeared, escorted by a guard. He looked different. The elegant suit had been replaced by a gray uniform. He had several days' growth of beard and deep dark circles under his eyes, but what impacted me most was his gaze. There was no longer any arrogance in those eyes, just fear and perhaps shame. He sat across from me and picked up the phone, with hands I noticed were trembling. I did the same. "Dad," his voice was hoarse. "You came." "I'm your father," I simply replied. Despite everything, we remained silent for a few seconds, looking at each other through the glass. This man in front of me was my flesh and blood, my legacy in this world, and yet he seemed like a complete stranger. "Why, Sterling?" I finally asked. "Why did you do this to me?" He lowered his gaze, unable to meet mine. "You wouldn't understand." "Try," I insisted. "I'm giving you the chance to explain yourself." Sterling sighed deeply. "At first, I really was worried about you. After Mom died, you seemed so lost, so alone. I thought it would be better for you to live in a place where you had company, medical attention. But that doesn't explain the fraud, the forged signatures, the stolen money." His face hardened slightly. "I had debts, Dad, a lot of debts. Investments that went wrong, loans I couldn't repay. Naomi didn't know. I hid the truth from her. We were about to lose everything. And you decided the solution was to steal from your own father? It was going to be my inheritance anyway," he exclaimed, showing a flicker of the arrogance I'd seen before. "I was just accelerating it." "An inheritance is a gift, son, not a right," I responded firmly. "And it certainly isn't something you take while the other person is still alive." Sterling seemed to deflate at my words. "The Thompsons and the Johnsons came to see you, didn't they?" "I know all about it." "Yes, they came. Innocent people. You also deceived." "I can fix it," he said quickly. "I have the money in an account. I can give it all back." "And the money you took from my accounts and the loans in my name? Can you fix that too?" His silence was answer enough. "Naomi and the kids need me, Dad," he said after a moment. "If you leave me in this place, who will take care of them?" "You should have thought about that sooner," I replied, though every word hurt, before you risked everything for ambition? Are you going to let your only son rot in jail? His tone became accusatory. After everything Mom and you taught me about forgiveness, is this how it all ends? He mentioned Grace, and I felt as if he had slapped me. Don't use your mother to manipulate me, I told him with a harshness I didn't know I had inside. She taught you about forgiveness, yes, but also about honesty, respect, and responsibility for your actions. Sterling lightly tapped the glass with the palm of his hand. Please, Dad. I'm sorry. I swear it. Give me a chance. I looked into his eyes, searching for the boy Amire. I raised. The young man, who once looked at me with admiration. I desperately wanted to believe him. Are you truly sorry, Sterling? Or do you just regret getting caught? His silence and the way he averted his gaze gave me the answer I feared. I slowly stood up, feeling every one of my 78 years in my tired bones. I'll talk to the prosecutor, I told him. I'll see what can be done. You'll help me? His voice sounded hopeful. I will do what is best for everyone, I replied. For you and your children, for the families you deceived, and for me. I hung up the phone and turned away, feeling his gaze fixed on my back as I walked away. The tears I had held back throughout the conversation finally ran freely down my wrinkled cheeks. Outside, the sky was still gray, but the rain had stopped. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling a strange relief. I hadn't found all the answers I was looking for during that visit, but at least now I saw the path I needed to take. On the way home, I stopped by the cemetery where Grace rested. I knelt down with difficulty in front of her tombstone and wiped away some dry leaves that had fallen on the marker. Our boy got lost, Grace, I murmured. He got lost, and I don't know if we can get him back, but I promise you I'll do what's right, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. As I stood up, I noticed the sun starting to peek through the clouds, faintly illuminating Grace's photograph on the headstone. Her smile, frozen in time, seemed to give me the strength I needed for what was to come. That afternoon, I gathered everyone involved at my house. Marcus the lawyer, Wally my old friend, Brenda my loyal neighbor, Naomi and my grandchildren, and the Thompsons and Johnsons. It was time to seek a solution that, if it couldn't repair all the damage, would at least allow us to move forward. But before I tell you what I decided and how it changed all our lives, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to make a decision where forgiving seemed impossible, but punishing felt too painful? How did you resolve it? I'd like to know your opinion as we await the final chapter of this story that forever marked my life and my family's. Welcome back to this story, which, like life itself, is full of light and shadows. In the previous chapters, I told you how my son, Sterling, tried to strip me of everything I owned by cutting the electricity in my house on a cold night, which led me to discover his fraud schemes, and how, after his arrest, I faced the difficult situation with his wife Naomi, my grandchildren, and the innocent families who had also been deceived. That afternoon, sitting at the head of my table, I observed the worried faces of everyone gathered in my living room. Marcus, my lawyer, reviewed some documents with a serious expression. Wally, my old friend and ex-cop, stood by the window, as if keeping watch. Brenda, my loyal neighbor, served coffee to those present. Naomi, with reddened eyes, hugged my grandchildren. Ethan, 8 years old, was drawing absent-mindedly in a notebook, unaware of the gravity of the situation, while Valerie, 6, dozed on her mother's lap. The Thompsons and the Johnsons, the families who had bought lots of my land, talked in low voices, occasionally glancing my way. "Thank you all for coming," I began, clearing my throat. "I've gathered you because what we decide today will affect each of you in some way." I briefly explained the situation so that everyone understood the magnitude of the problem. Sterling had committed multiple felonies: signature forgery, bank fraud, illegal sale of property, creation of a shell company, and even an attempt to have me declared incompetent to gain full control of my assets. The prosecutor has enough evidence to send him to prison for many years, Marcus continued, taking the floor. But Mr. Vance wants to explore other possibilities. All eyes turned to me. I could feel the weight of their expectations, their fears, their hopes. "I have spent days thinking about what to do," I told them, in a tired but firm voice. "As a father, my heart asks me to forgive Sterling and do what I can to save him. But as a just man, I cannot ignore the harm he has caused, not only to me, but to all of you." Robert Thompson leaned forward. "Mr. Vance, my family invested all our savings in that lot. If the sale isn't valid, I completely understand." I interrupted him gently. "And I want you to know that you won't lose your money. That is my first decision. I will honor the sales of the lots that Sterling offered you." The faces of the Thompsons and the Johnsons lit up with relief. "But with one condition," I added. "The land you bought is worth more than you paid. Sterling sold it at a very low price to get money quickly. I propose that we formalize the sale at the fair market price, which you will pay in comfortable monthly installments over the next few years." Robert Thompson looked at his wife, and both nodded. "That's more than fair," he replied. Mr. Johnson also expressed his agreement. "As for the loans Sterling took out in my name," I continued, "Marcus has negotiated with the banks. Fortunately, we had clear evidence of the fraud, so those debts will be annulled." Marcus nodded, confirming my words. "The money Sterling diverted from my accounts is another story," I said, looking at Naomi. "Part of that money was transferred to offshore accounts that are now frozen. Another part was spent on failed investments." Naomi lowered her gaze, pressing her lips together. "I had no idea where that money came from," she murmured. "Sterling told me they were successful investments." "I believe you," I told her sincerely. "And that is why my next decision has to do with you and my grandchildren." The room fell completely silent. Even little Ethan stopped drawing, sensing the tension in the air. "Sterling must face the consequences of his actions," I finally declared. "I have decided not to withdraw the charges." Naomi stifled a sob. Valerie, awakened by the sound, looked at her mother worriedly. "But," I continued, "I have spoken with the prosecutor. If Sterling pleads guilty, returns as much of the stolen money as he can, and accepts certain conditions, he could face a reduced sentence, possibly with parole after 3 years." Naomi's eyes widened with surprise and hope. 3 years is still a long time for children. Without their father, I acknowledged. "That's why my last decision is this. Naomi, you and my grandchildren can live in this house with me if you wish." The proposal took everyone by surprise, especially Naomi. "Mr. Vance," she stammered, "after what Sterling did, you're offering us your home?" "I'm offering you a home," I corrected. "This house is too big for an old man like me, and I would like to get to know my grandchildren better, to spend time with them while I still can. Besides," I added with a small smile, "you could help me with some chores that are getting difficult for me." Ethan, understanding something of the conversation, approached me curiously. "Grandpa, are we going to live with you?" he asked. "If your mom agrees," I replied, ruffling his hair. Naomi looked at me with tears in her eyes. Why are you doing this for us? Because you are not to blame for Sterling's decisions, and because family is the most important thing we have in this life. Wally, who had remained silent until that moment, cleared his throat. And what about the shell company he created? There are still pending contracts, people expecting services. Marcus will take care of legally dissolving that company and notifying everyone involved, I explained. We will pay whatever is necessary to resolve those issues without harming third parties. That could cost you a lot of money, Mr. Vance, Marcus warned. Money comes and goes, I replied. Peace of mind and honor are priceless. We spent the next few hours discussing details, signing documents, and making calls. By the time everyone left, it was already night. Brenda was the last to leave after helping me tidy the living room. You are a good man, Elijah, she said as she left. Grace would be proud. I remained alone on the porch, gazing at the stars shining in the clear sky. For the first time in many days, I felt a certain peace. The next day, I visited Sterling again at the detention center. His appearance had worsened. Thinner, unshaven, deep dark circles under his eyes. He looked at me with a mixture of hope and fear when I sat across from him. I spoke with the prosecutor. I informed him bluntly. They are offering you a deal. I explained the terms. Plead guilty to all charges. Fully cooperate in recovering the diverted funds. Commit to a rehabilitation program. And serve a minimum of 3 years in prison before being eligible for parole. 3 years. His voice sounded hollow. That's a long time, Dad. It's less than you deserve, according to the law, I replied frankly. But more than I would like as a father. Sterling remained silent, looking at his shackled hands. What will happen to Naomi and the children? Without my salary? Without a place to live? They will live with me, I informed him. I already spoke with Naomi, and she agrees. His face showed a mix of relief and jealousy. So, you're keeping my family in addition to the house, he muttered. I'm not keeping your family, Sterling, I corrected him firmly. I'm offering them a home while you can't, unless you prefer they live on the street. He lowered his gaze, ashamed. I'm sorry. It's just hard to imagine them living with you while I'm locked up here. It would have been harder for them if your plans had worked, I reminded him. You would have left me with nothing, declared incompetent, locked up in an assisted living facility against my will. Sterling didn't respond, but I saw a tear slide down his cheek. Son, I softened my tone. I still don't understand how you got to this point. What happened to the honest boy your mother and I raised? It took him a few minutes to answer, as if he were searching for the right words. It started with small lies, he finally began. A gambling debt I hid from Naomi. Then came risky investments to try to recover that money, which only made things worse. Every step sank me deeper, and every lie required another to sustain it. He paused, wiping away his tears with the back of his hand. When Mom died, and I saw you so vulnerable, I saw an opportunity. I told myself I was really doing you a favor, that you would be better off in a place with medical attention. But deep down, I knew I was only justifying the unjustifiable. It was the first time I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. No justifications, no manipulations, just the raw truth of a man facing the consequences of his mistakes. Will you accept the deal? I asked him after a long silence. Do I have another option? There are always options, Sterling. You can go to trial and risk a much longer sentence, or you can accept responsibility, serve your time, and start rebuilding your life and your relationship with your family. Sterling nodded slowly. I'll accept the deal, he finally said. And Dad, Thank you for taking care of Naomi and the children. They're my family too, I simply replied. We said goodbye with a lump in my throat. As the guard led him away, Sterling turned one last time. Dad, will you be able to forgive me someday? He asked. The vulnerability in his voice reminded me of the boy he once was. I'm on the way to doing so, I answered honestly. Forgiveness is a process, not an event. But I promise you that when you get out, I'll be waiting for you. The following weeks were intensely busy. With Marcus's help, I resolved all of the pending legal issues. Naomi and the children moved into my house, occupying the second-floor bedrooms. At first, it was strange to have the house full of noise again, but I soon got used to it and even started to enjoy it. Ethan turned out to be a curious and energetic boy who followed me everywhere, asking about every tool in my workshop. Valerie, quieter and more observant, sat next to me on the porch in the afternoons, drawing while I told her stories about her Grandma Grace. Naomi, initially shy and embarrassed, gradually found her place. She turned out to be an excellent cook and an efficient administrator. She organized the house, established routines for the children, and helped me put my documents and finances in order. I can never thank you enough, Mr. Vance, she told me one night as we did the dishes after dinner. You saved us when you could have turned your back on us. You're wrong about one thing, Naomi, I replied. You also saved me. After Sterling's betrayal, and without Grace, this house felt like a tomb. You've brought life back to it. One afternoon, while teaching Ethan how to repair a wooden chair in my small workshop, the boy asked me the question I knew would eventually come. Grandpa, Dad did something wrong, right? That's why he's far away. I took my time to answer, searching for the right words for a child his age. Your dad made mistakes, Ethan, I finally explained. Serious mistakes that had consequences. He's paying for those mistakes now, but when he's done, he'll come back home to us. And will you still love Dad when he comes back? He asked, with that innocence so typical of childhood. Of course, I assured him. When someone you love makes a mistake, even a serious one, you don't stop loving them. That doesn't mean what he did was right, but a father's love is stronger than a son's mistakes. Ethan seemed satisfied with the answer and returned to concentrating on the chair we were fixing. But his words stayed with me, resonating in my heart. Months passed, and we established a comfortable routine. Every Sunday, I took Naomi and the children to visit Sterling. At first, the visits were tense and awkward. The children were confused, and Sterling was ashamed. But over time, things improved. Sterling seemed different, more humble, more reflective, genuinely interested in his children's lives. He looks more like the Sterling I knew when we got married, Naomi commented to me one day after a particularly good visit, before the debts and ambition changed him. 1 year after Sterling entered prison, I received an unexpected call. It was the director of the bank where I had held my accounts for decades. Mr. Vance, he explained, we've been exhaustively investigating your son's case, and we've discovered something important. Part of the money we thought was lost has been located in an account in the Cayman Islands. The news took me by surprise. According to the director, they had managed to recover almost 60% of the funds Sterling had diverted. It was a considerable amount that would greatly help stabilize our financial situation. When I told Sterling during our next visit, I saw something in his eyes that I hadn't seen for a long time. Hope. That means I'll be able to make more restitution than I thought, he said excitedly. Maybe the judge will consider reducing my sentence. Don't get your hopes up, I warned him, but it's definitely good news. And it turned out to be. The judge, impressed by the recovery of the funds and the positive reports about Sterling's behavior in prison, agreed to review his case. His sentence was reduced, with the possibility of parole after 2 years instead of 3. Christmas that year was especially meaningful. We decorated the house as we hadn't since Grace was alive. Ethan and Valerie hung ornaments on the tree. Naomi cooked a delicious dinner, and even Brenda joined the celebration. We even got special permission for Sterling to video call us that night. It wasn't the same as having him present, but seeing his face on the screen, smiling, as the children showed him their gifts, brought a bittersweet joy to our hearts. "Next year, I'll be there with you," Sterling promised, before saying goodbye. And for the first time, I truly believed him. The following spring, the cherry trees that Grace had planted in the garden blossomed with an exuberance I didn't recall seeing before. It was as if she, from wherever she was sending us a message of renewal and hope. One morning, while watering those flowers, I received another surprising call. It was the prosecutor handling Sterling's case. "Mr. Vance," he began, "your son has demonstrated exemplary behavior during his time in prison. He has completed rehabilitation programs, financially advised other inmates, and even organized literacy classes. Considering this and the substantial restitution of funds, the judge has approved his early parole. Sterling will be able to come home in 2 weeks." The news left me speechless. 2 weeks! After everything that had happened, my son would be coming home in just 14 days. When I told Naomi, she burst into tears of joy. The children jumped with excitement, though Valerie, being so small, barely remembered what it was like to live with her father. "Where will Dad sleep?" Ethan, ever practical, asked. "In your room, Mom." Naomi looked at me, and I understood the unease in her eyes. How would the family dynamic work with Sterling back? Could we all live under the same roof after what happened? "Let's prepare the guest room for your dad," I suggested, giving them time and space to redefine their relationship. "You'll have time to decide the permanent arrangements later." We spent the following days preparing the house for his arrival. I painted the room. Naomi bought new sheets, and the children made welcome drawings. Even Brenda baked a cake for the occasion. The day finally arrived. We decided that I would go alone to pick him up, to give him time to process his freedom before facing the whole family. I waited outside the detention center, feeling a mix of emotions ranging from joy to apprehension. When Sterling appeared at the door carrying a small bag with his belongings, I barely recognized him. He was thinner, with shorter hair, and there was something different in his gaze. A calm, a serenity he hadn't possessed before. He saw me and stopped for a moment, as if unsure how to proceed. Then he walked toward me with measured steps. We stood face to face, father and son, with 2 years of separation and a lifetime of shared history between us. "You're here," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promised you," I replied. "I told you I'd be waiting." Without another word, we embraced. A long, strong hug that said everything words could not express. Forgiveness, not granted, but in process. Love never extinguished, despite the pain. The hope of a new beginning. The drive home was mostly silent. Sterling looked out the window, rediscovering the outside world, as if seeing it for the first time. "Is everyone home?" he asked as we approached. "Yes, they're anxious to see you." "I'm scared, Dad," he confessed. "What if the kids don't recognize me? What if Naomi has changed her mind about me?" "You'll have to rebuild those relationships day by day," I told him honestly. "But they are waiting for you with open arms. The rest will depend on you." When we arrived, everyone was on the porch. Naomi, beautiful in a dress I hadn't seen her wear before. Ethan practically jumping with excitement. Valerie, partially hidden behind her mother, shy, but curious. Even Brenda was there, holding her welcome cake. Sterling stayed in the car for a few seconds, breathing deeply. Then he got out and walked slowly toward his family. Ethan was the first to break the formality, running toward him, shouting, "Dad!" Sterling lifted him into his arms, tears streaming down his cheeks. Naomi approached with Valerie, who observed this familiar stranger with big, cautious eyes. "You're home," Naomi said. And there was so much in those simple words. "I am home," Sterling repeated, and he extended his free hand to Valerie, who, after a moment of doubt, took it. I watched them walk into the house together, a broken family, beginning to heal. I stayed behind for a moment, looking up at the blue sky. "We did it, Grace," I whispered. "Our boy is home." The following months were not easy. There were moments of tension, arguments, and tears. Sterling had to learn to be a husband and father again. Naomi had to learn to trust again. The children had to adjust to having their father present in their daily lives. But there were also moments of pure joy. The first time, Sterling took Ethan fishing. The night Valerie finally fell asleep in her father's arms. The morning I found Sterling and Naomi embracing in the kitchen, whispering words I couldn't hear, but that made both of them smile. 6 months after his release, Sterling found work as an accountant at a small local firm. The owner, an old friend of mine who believed in second chances, gave him the opportunity that others denied him because of his record. "I'll never be able to repay everything you've done for us, Dad," Sterling told me one night as we shared coffee on the porch. The children were already asleep, and Naomi was reading in the living room. "I'm not looking for you to repay me for anything," I replied. "I just want to see you be the man I know you can be." For a long time, I only saw what I didn't have, he reflected. Now, I value what I always had, a family that loves me despite my mistakes. We remained silent for a while, listening to the crickets and feeling the night breeze. "Do you know what really changed me?" he finally asked. "What?" "That after everything I did to you, you were still my father. You didn't abandon me. That showed me what it means to love unconditionally, what true family means." His words filled me with an emotion I could barely contain. I put my hand over his and squeezed it gently. "It's what fathers do," I simply said. "It's what Grace and I taught you. And it's what I will teach my children," he promised. Today, 3 years after that cold night when Sterling cut the electricity to my house, our family is whole again. Not perfect, but whole. Sterling and Naomi bought a small house a few blocks from mine. The children come to visit me almost daily and often stay overnight on weekends. The house they once tried to take from me is still my home, filled with memories of Grace and now also with the laughter of my grandchildren. The pain of the betrayal has faded, replaced by the satisfaction of seeing my family restored. Sometimes, when I'm alone on the porch watching the sunset, I feel Grace's presence beside me, and I know she would be proud of how this story ended. Because in the end, what I learned is that justice without mercy can be as destructive as mercy without justice. Finding that balance is perhaps the most difficult task we face in life. The darkness Sterling brought into my life that night ended up revealing painful truths, but it also illuminated the path toward redemption and reconciliation. Sometimes it's only when we are in complete darkness that we can see the stars most clearly. Before I say goodbye, I want to thank you for listening to my story. If anything has resonated with you, if you have found any lesson in my words, I ask you to subscribe to this channel and share your own experiences in the comments. Have you had to forgive something that seemed unforgivable? Have you found redemption after making a serious mistake? Your story might be exactly what someone needs to hear today. Always remember that family, with all its imperfections and challenges, is still the most valuable treasure we have in this life. Take care of it, cherish it, and never take the time you have with your loved ones for granted. From Cypress Creek, this old man sends you a big hug. See you soon, friends.